We need to talk. No, really, if we're going to become fluent in Japanese, we need to talk and talk a lot. So what is fluency and how do you know when you're fluent? I ran an informal poll on the community tab to find out what people think. How long does it take you to become fluent? And probably one of the best answers is it depends on what you mean by fluent. So that's going to be the focus of today's video, aside from not getting bit by mosquitoes, which I think is going to happen anyway. So one way to know if you're fluent is, do you translate in your head? Do you think in your first language, translate into Japanese, and then speak in Japanese? I want to encourage you to stop translating in your head as quickly as possible. Now, can you think on your feet? When I first came to Japan, I could not think on my feet. The only way to get up to speed was to put in a lot of reps. In a fast-paced city like Tokyo, if you take a moment to think, people would just assume that you don't speak Japanese and they will try to ask you the same question in English. Question I commonly get is, do you dream in Japanese? Now, I have heard that one of the signs of fluency is you start to dream in that target language. Now, I don't really remember my dreams, so I don't know if I'm dreaming in Japanese or English or whatever. How much do you understand? Now, your Japanese teacher is going to speak Japanese with training wheels to you. They're going to speak very simple sentences. They're going to enunciate. They're going to speak really slow. So don't be fooled into thinking because you can understand your Japanese teacher that you're fluent in Japanese. The way to test this is go out on the street, listen to conversations between two Japanese native speakers. Or if you can't come to Japan, watch a Japanese TV show or a game show, a drama, a movie. Can you understand without subtitles the conversation between the two actors or sometimes more actors? So understanding your Japanese teacher is like playing Little League Baseball, where understanding a conversation on the street is like walking into the major leagues. Eventually, though, you'll hit a home run. Now, I don't always understand, and sometimes I just tune conversations out. So no, I don't always understand the conversations that I hear on the street. Do people understand you? Now, if your partner or your Japanese teacher are the only people who can understand you, you're in trouble. You want to go out and test your Japanese with real Japanese people, or at least fluent Japanese speakers. And if they can understand you, you're one step toward being fluent. Now, Japan is special because when people see me, a lot of times they expect to hear English, and when they hear me speak Japanese, it throws them into this cognitive dissonance, and they don't know what's going on. It takes some kind of a moment to settle into the situation. And I've learned to be patient with that process. It's not always easy. But in order to be understood in conversation, you really need to pay attention to pronunciation. Now, once again, I've said in my other videos, I have a big ego, and since I could speak a kind of intermediate level of Spanish before I started studying Japanese, I thought, well, because I read somewhere or heard somewhere that the pronunciation is a lot like Spanish. That kind of does pertain to the vowels, but Spanish, as far as I know, is not a pitch accent language. So I just went into Japanese thinking, I have great pronunciation. And a lot of people will tell you in the beginning stages, wow, you're the best Japanese speaker I've ever heard. Don't believe that. Don't buy the hype. Don't let it make you complacent. They're just being nice. So a lot of conversations in Japanese are what I call a canned conversation. There are certain phrases that you use every single time. So when you go home, you open the door, you say tadaima, and the person in the house says okaeri nasai. You never deviate from that. So a lot of Japanese conversations are scripted. You don't ever go off the script. But foreigners, we sometimes tend to think a little too creatively. And if we go off the script, that can really throw off the conversation, really upset the apple cart, and people get really confused, and they start to think, oh, he doesn't speak Japanese. Maybe you're just being creative, maybe trying to be funny. A friend of mine learned arigatou gozaimasu means thank you, and then masen, like dekimasen, means I can't do that, or nihongo hanasemasen, I don't speak Japanese. He thought that you would say arigatou gozaimasen, meaning no thank you. And that was a big joke in our language school for quite a long time. He ended up using it in conversation, and Japanese people had no idea what he was saying. He would have to explain the joke, and if you have to explain the joke, it's not fun anymore. But Japanese people tend to fill in the blanks. My pitch accent is not perfect because I didn't even know it was a thing until a couple years ago. And if you want to learn about pitch accent, I would say watch Dogen's channel. There's a link below. So just a month or two ago, I was at a convenience store with a Japanese friend. I bought a single bottle of water, and they asked me if I needed a bag. And I said, iranai desu. And I thought, I don't know the correct pitch accent for this, so I'm just going to make it flat, right? Iranai desu. And they couldn't understand me. And so he said, I nimai? Like, do you need two? I was like, what's your problem? Didn't you hear me say iranai desu? No, he heard my pitch accent. But this is the correct way to say it.
いらないです。
I'm going to attempt it. Iranai desu. How'd I do? I use listener, and this is great for sounding out Japanese words. If there's a word you're not sure how to pronounce, use listener, and it'll show you the correct pronunciation. It has male and female voices. So should I focus on quality or quantity? Well, there's a lot of vocab in Japanese. I'm still learning new words. When I pick up a newspaper, there's always a word I haven't seen yet. And by the way, don't get discouraged because even Japanese people run into kanji that they don't know. So according to the Nihon Kokugo Daijiten, there are approximately 500,000 words in Japanese. Don't get discouraged because the average educated person knows about 10 to 20,000 words. Now, don't worry. To have a conversation, you only need to understand about 2,000 words, and you can do that. So do you feel at ease when you speak Japanese? Well, this is always an issue. I used to really care what people thought about me, and I probably still do, but I'm always worried whether the person's going to understand me or not, because there's so many interactions where I say something that sounds perfectly fine to me, the other person has no idea what I'm talking about. A lot of times it's their preconceived notion that a person who looks like me can't possibly speak Japanese. Now, don't get discouraged because I've seen Japanese people talk to each other, and if they use a word that's a homonym,
miru, miru, and miru.
they might ask for clarification, or they might completely misunderstand what the other person is saying. Look at two people speaking in English. Now, I can say something that sounds perfectly neutral or friendly to me. The other person might take offense. This happens in text messages, by the way, so I encourage everybody in the comments, be nice to each other. That's all I got to say about that. So do you know and do you understand the different levels of politeness? Now, in my other video, I talked about why it's important to learn des, mas first, because we always revert back to muscle memory. If you get nervous and you've studied des, mas first, you're going to go back to des, mas. Person you're speaking with may say, you don't need to be so formal with me. You can go back to informal language. But if you use des, mas, you're pretty safe in all social interactions. So do you understand Japanese comedy? Now, a lot of it goes over my head, not because of vocabulary, but a lot of the references they're making are cultural references that date back a decade or so, and I don't always get them. I'm not always aware of what's happening in the gossip column. What is really amazing, though, is the timing. In Japanese comedy, or manzai in this case, there's usually a duo, and they have the person who has the role of bokeh, who's kind of airheaded and makes kind of dumb statements, and you have the tsukomi, is the person who is like the bright person who burns them based on the dumb things they say. So a lot of times what makes me laugh is the timing of the burn, the timing of the comeback, and their expressions on their faces. So if you can understand Japanese comedy, you're next level. Can you make people laugh in Japanese? Now, in Japanese, they have what is called the dad joke, oyaji gyagu. Now, I can sometimes come up with these. The object of the dad joke is not to make people laugh. The object is to be so bad that everybody groans. And so if you can make a really bad dad joke in Japanese, you're doing pretty good. But can you tell a joke in Japanese? It's not always easy. I've made people laugh in Japanese before. Usually self-deprecating humor works better. So I was at a jewelry store a couple years ago and I found a Skagen watch. That's a Danish watch. And I think I'm, according to 23andMe, about 5 to 10% Danish. And I asked the salesperson, I said, I'm part Danish. I didn't disclose the fact that it's only 5 to 10%, but could you give me a discount for being part Danish? And they're like, no, we don't give discounts. The price on the watch is the price. And I said, what about for a really handsome part Danish guy? Because I can go find one. And then I got him to laugh. I still didn't get the discount, but I find that self-deprecating humor works best, in my case. Now, you know you've really reached a high level of fluency in Japanese when you can understand the news. Now, they kind of make it easy because they'll do the same segments over and over every night in the same order. And then when there's a major event, like the Hanshin Daishinsai, I think I called it the wrong name in my other video. Sorry about that. But each event gets a name, and every news outlet will use that name, so you know what event they're talking about. Do you understand nuance? Do you understand how to finesse in Japanese? Can you sugarcoat your language? Can you tailor it to the situation? So an American friend of mine was dating a Japanese woman who's about 5 years younger than him, and he asked her, like, does it bother you that I'm older than you? And she said, no, all my boyfriends are older than me. And he had to take a double take and think, okay, her language level is not that good. So he asked her to clarify. She said, no, I have dated guys who were older than me. And so he got clarification because when she said all my boyfriends are older than me, it sounded like she had a whole group of them. So you might make mistakes like that in Japanese. So learn finesse. A lot of times I get frustrated with Japanese people because they tend to be very indirect. And when I first learned Japanese, I didn't have the vocabulary or the patience to be indirect. Now I've learned to be a little more indirect in Japanese. And when I'm less direct in Japanese, people tell me, well, you're so fluent. And all I've really done was just beat around the bush. Can you talk on the phone? No, there's the common meme of the person on the phone bowing, speaking Japanese. Like Han Solo says, it's all true. But if you can talk on the phone because you can't see the other person's body language, and a majority of interpersonal communication is body language. So when I go to the convenience store and they ask me if I want a bag and I say no, this motion means no thank you. So they put the gesture and the sounds coming out of my mouth together, and hopefully they get the right answer. But on the phone, you don't have that. So I had a situation one time where I started to think, wow, I must be really good at Japanese because I fooled a person into thinking I was Japanese. A friend of mine was lost in Tokyo and we were supposed to meet up, but he couldn't describe to me where he was because he didn't read Japanese. So he gave his phone to a person at the train station and he told me, please ask this person where I'm at. So, and now these are the old days with the flip phones before smartphones. The quality wasn't that good. So I spoke to the person in Japanese. They thought I was Japanese. And here's how I know, because he referred to my friend as Jingai. Now, as you know, the word for foreigner is Gaikokujin or Gaijin for short. And a lot of times, since a lot of foreigners know that Gaijin means foreigner, a lot of Japanese will say Jingai. They'll reverse it. And that way they think that the foreigner doesn't know that they're talking about them. So he referred to my friend as Jingai, and I thought, oh, this is something you would say if you thought I was Japanese. Made me feel really good that he thought he was speaking to another Japanese person. Might have also been the quality of the phone call. Who knows? Can you feel in Japanese? Describing feelings in Japanese is very different because they use parts of the body, like atama ni kuru. It came to my head, which means I was upset, or haragatatsu, my stomach stood up. That also means upset. So they use parts of the body to explain emotions, and that can be pretty foreign to speakers of other languages. But can you watch a drama and do you feel emotion when the main characters break up or they get into a fight? Now, not everybody gets emotional when they watch TV. I do, but I started to think when I watched the drama and I understood that these two characters are breaking up and that it made me sad because I really wanted them to stay together. That made me feel like I was fluent because I got a tear in my eye when she told him goodbye. Can you tell a story? Now, I can't always tell a story in English. A lot of the videos you watch from me are heavily edited, kind of like this. But can you tell a story in Japanese? Like, this happened, therefore this happened, they overcame this problem, therefore this result happened. Now, in Japanese, it doesn't always happen like that. A lot of times, the person speaking, telling the story, might try to lead you to a conclusion that they want you to reach, but will not tell you which conclusion they want you to reach. Part of being a very indirect or high context culture. By the way, what's the difference between an interpreter and a translator? I'm going to give the answer at the end. Now we need to clear up some misconceptions about people who speak Japanese. There is a perception that if you speak Japanese, you know every single word in the Japanese language. Kind of like Neo, right?
I speak Japanese.
There's also a misperception that you can translate into Japanese. So a couple years ago, I went into a project and we had to do an interview, and they gave me one of their marketing pamphlets and said, here, translate this into Japanese. And I immediately knew that they didn't know what they're talking about. And I started thinking, do I want to work on a project with this company? So I just said, okay. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get this, but I'm already here. So translate a couple sentences into Japanese. They went back to the hiring manager and told him, that guy's Japanese is terrible. He couldn't translate into Japanese. And he said, what are you talking about? You never have somebody translate into a foreign language. You have them translate into their first language, their mother tongue. They gave me a call. They said, hey, welcome to the project. Tips on achieving fluency in Japanese. Now, have a concrete goal. When I first started studying Japanese at a school, I had been here a couple years. I went to a Japanese school and said, I want to take Japanese classes. And they said, what's your goal? I said, well, I live in Japan. I want to speak Japanese. The teacher said, not good enough. Fortunately, I love Japanese cars. I was picking up Japanese car magazines and trying to read them. And you'd have to learn a lot of specialized kanji in order to read them, have to learn a lot of specialized vocabulary. Fortunately, I had a really good goal. I didn't know that was my goal I just know I love Japanese cars. So have a concrete goal. You can always adjust later. Do you want to play shogi? Do you want to talk to your partner's family? Do you want to get into university? Do you want to discuss rocket science? All those are great goals. I encourage you, whatever your goal is, just keep studying. Let's say your goal is to get into a Japanese university and you need to pass the N1 to do that. So after you've done that, you need to set a new goal. Maybe you want to be able to discuss organic chemistry in Japanese. Maybe you want to discuss rocket science in Japanese. You can always adjust that goal. Make sure to adjust it up. Every goal is a good goal. It's going to give you a lot of motivation to keep studying, even when you don't feel like you're making progress. And now to answer the question, what's the difference between a translator and interpreter? A translator deals with the written word, and interpreter deals with the spoken word. So a friend of mine runs a translation company. Somebody called him up and said, I need a translator. They said, okay, send the file over. And the customer finally said, no, I need you to come translate for me when I'm speaking at this conference. I need you to translate live for me. What he was really looking for was a simultaneous interpreter. So the translation company, which deals with the written word, referred him to a very competent interpreter who was able to handle the job.